Welcome to the Sleepy Bat. Tonight I'm going to talk about the truth behind the Knights of ancient Rome, a side of the empire that rarely makes it into textbooks but shaped everything from politics to passion. So find a quiet spot, grab your pillow, and let the flickering light of oil lamps guide you through alleys, baths, and banquet halls. Because when the sun went down over Rome, the masks came off, and the real stories began. But before we stumble into this intoxicating world of after-hours Roman excess, let me paint you a picture of just how wild these nights could get. Picture this. It's 78 CE, and Emperor Vespasian has just opened the Colosseum to great fanfare. But while Romans flock to see gladiators during the day, the real action starts when darkness falls. In the thermal baths of Caracalla, senators negotiate million-denarii deals, while lounging naked in pools heated by underground furnaces. Meanwhile, in the Subura district, wine shops transform into gambling dens where fortunes change hands faster than you can say, "Ave Caesar." And in the private dining rooms of the wealthy, dinner parties stretch until dawn, fueled by exotic delicacies, imported wines, and entertainment that would scandalize even the most liberal modern sensibilities. This isn't just hearsay or Hollywood fiction. Archaeological evidence, ancient graffiti, and the writings of poets like Ovid and Martial give us an uncensored glimpse into a world where the night shift was often more important than the day job. We're talking about a civilization that invented the concept of nightlife as we know it, where the darkness didn't mean danger, it meant opportunity. Now you might be thinking, surely the Romans were more civilized than this, right? They built aqueducts, created law codes, and gave us philosophy. Well, that's exactly the point. The same minds that engineered architectural marvels by day were engineering elaborate schemes of pleasure by night. The Romans didn't see a contradiction between high culture and hedonistic indulgence. In fact, they saw them as two sides of the same golden coin. Here's what's going to blow your mind about Roman nightlife. It wasn't just about drinking and debauchery, though there was plenty of both. It was a sophisticated ecosystem of social climbing, political maneuvering, and cultural exchange that happened exclusively under cover of darkness. The thermal baths weren't just places to get clean, they were Rome's version of exclusive clubs where the empire's power brokers gathered to cut deals that would reshape the Mediterranean world. The taverns weren't just places to drink, they were information exchanges where secrets worth more than gold changed hands over cups of diluted wine. And the dinner parties? These weren't casual get-togethers. They were carefully orchestrated theatrical productions where every course, every entertainment, and every conversation was designed to display wealth, forge alliances, or destroy enemies. A single invitation to the right dinner party could launch a political career. The wrong toast at the wrong moment could end one. But here's where it gets really interesting. Roman nightlife operated on a completely different set of rules than Roman day life. Social hierarchies that seemed carved in stone during daylight hours became surprisingly fluid after sunset. Slaves could gamble alongside senators in certain establishments. Foreign merchants could rub shoulders with patrician wives in the baths, and courtesans wielded influence that rivaled elected officials, all because they knew how to navigate the twilight world where normal rules didn't apply. The Romans had a saying, "In vino veritas," in wine, truth, but they could have just as easily said, in tenebris libertas, in darkness, freedom. Because when the sun went down over the Tiber, Romans shed more than just their togas. They shed their inhibitions, their pretenses, and sometimes their loyalties. Take the thermal baths, for instance. During the day, they were places of routine hygiene and casual socializing. But at night, they transformed into something entirely different. The largest bath complexes could accommodate thousands of people simultaneously, and after dark, they became venues for everything from clandestine political meetings to elaborate orgies that would make Caligula proud. The same marble halls that echoed with mundane conversation during the day reverberated with whispered conspiracies, passionate affairs, and business deals that would reshape trade routes across 3 continents. And we haven't even talked about the wine yet. Roman wine culture makes modern sommelier pretension look like amateur hour. These weren't people casually sipping Chianti with dinner. Romans approached wine with the seriousness of a military campaign and the passion of a religious ceremony. They had wines aged in underwater caves, wines flavored with everything from rose petals to crushed pearls, and wines so potent that drinking them undiluted was considered both dangerous and barbaric. But wine wasn't just about intoxication, it was about transformation. The Romans believed that wine didn't just change your mood, it changed your very essence. Under the influence of Bacchus, a timid clerk could become a bold orator, a faithful wife could become an adventurous lover, and a loyal citizen could become a dangerous revolutionary. The night offered Romans a chance to become someone else entirely, and wine was their passport to that other world. The really fascinating part is how this nocturnal transformation affected Roman politics and society. Some of the most important decisions in Roman history were made not in the marble chambers of the Senate, but in the shadowy corners of wine shops and bathhouses. Assassination plots were hatched over dinner courses. Military campaigns were planned between the hot and cold pools of thermal complexes, and emperors rose and fell based on whispered conversations that happened long after the forum had emptied for the night. Julius Caesar's assassination wasn't just planned in secret meetings, it was refined and perfected during elaborate dinner parties where conspirators could speak freely under the cover of wine-loosened tongues and musical entertainment. Mark Antony's alliance with Cleopatra wasn't just a political calculation, it was forged during legendary night-long banquets that combined Egyptian luxury with Roman excess in ways that scandalized and fascinated the ancient world. Even the Great Fire that nearly destroyed Rome under Nero's rule started during one of the emperor's notorious nighttime artistic performances, where he insisted on singing and playing the lyre while the city burned around him. The night wasn't just when Romans relaxed, it was when they revealed their true natures for better and for worse. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Roman nightlife was how it democratized access to power and influence in ways that the rigid social structures of daytime Rome never could. In the thermal baths, a clever freedman with good information could find himself in conversation with a consul. In the right tavern, a foreign merchant with exotic goods could catch the attention of a senator's wife looking for adventure, and in the dining rooms of the wealthy, talented entertainers, skilled courtesans and eloquent philosophers could gain access to circles of power that would be completely closed to them during daylight hours. This wasn't accidental. Roman nightlife was designed to be a release valve for the pressures that built up during the highly regulated, strictly hierarchical world of daytime Roman society. By allowing certain freedoms and flexibilities after dark, the empire actually strengthened its control during the day. People were willing to accept rigid social structures and political limitations if they knew that sunset brought opportunities for advancement, pleasure, and expression that weren't available through official channels. And the Romans were masters at creating spaces that facilitated these nocturnal transformations. The architecture of Roman bathhouses, with their progression from cold to warm to hot pools, was designed to gradually relax both body and inhibitions. The layout of Roman taverns, with their maze-like arrangements of small rooms and hidden alcoves, provided perfect settings for private conversations and secret dealings. Even Roman dinner parties followed carefully choreographed scripts that used food, wine, and entertainment to gradually break down the barriers between guests and create an atmosphere where anything could happen. What's truly remarkable is how the Romans turned darkness into their greatest strategic advantage. While other civilizations feared the night and retreated behind locked doors, Romans conquered it just as thoroughly as they conquered Gaul or Britain. They didn't just tolerate the darkness, they weaponized it. Think about this for a moment. Here's an empire that controlled territories from Scotland to Syria, from Spain to the Black Sea. How do you maintain control over such vast distances with ancient communication technology? The answer lies partly in what happened after the sun went down. Roman nightlife wasn't just entertainment, it was intelligence gathering on an industrial scale. Every tavern keeper was potentially an informant. Every bathhouse attendant could be reporting conversations to government officials. Every courtesan might be extracting military secrets from visiting dignitaries. And every dinner party host was essentially running a sophisticated surveillance operation disguised as hospitality. The Romans turned social pleasure into statecraft, and they did it so elegantly that their guests rarely realized they were being interrogated. But here's where Roman genius really shows itself. They didn't just spy on people during these nocturnal gatherings, they created environments so seductive and intoxicating that people wanted to reveal their secrets. The combination of wine, luxury, sexual opportunity, and social advancement created a perfect storm where information flowed as freely as the imported wine from Gaul. Picture yourself as a Germanic tribal leader visiting Rome for the first time. During the day, you're escorted through official ceremonies, shown impressive monuments, and given carefully scripted presentations about Roman power. But at night, you're invited to a private bathhouse where the water is heated to perfect temperature, where attendants massage exotic oils into your skin, and where Roman senators casually discuss trade opportunities while beautiful entertainers pour wine that tastes like liquid gold. By the third hour of this experience, you're not thinking about military defenses or tribal loyalties. You're thinking about how you can get access to this lifestyle permanently. You start talking about your tribe's resources, their military capabilities, their political divisions. Not because anyone's forcing you to, but because you want to prove you're sophisticated enough to deserve a place in this intoxicating world. Sauduru. This is how Rome conquered minds before they conquered territories. They didn't just defeat enemies, they seduced them. And the primary battlefield for this seduction was the Roman knight. The wine culture alone was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Romans didn't just drink wine, they created wine experiences that were impossible to resist. They had wines that changed color as you drank them. Wines that were aged in amphoras buried in volcanic ash. Wines flavored with spices that cost more than most people's annual income. And wines that were served in ceremonies so elaborate that drinking them felt like participating in religious rituals. But the real genius was in the mixing. Romans almost never drank wine pure. They mixed it with water, with honey, with exotic spices, even with snow carried down from alpine peaks. This wasn't just about taste, it was about control. A skilled host could regulate exactly how intoxicated their guests became by adjusting the mixture throughout the evening. Too much water and the guest stays sharp and guarded. Too little and they become incoherent and useless for conversation. The perfect Roman host could keep their guests in that sweet spot where inhibitions were lowered, but intelligence remained intact, where secrets flowed freely but memories stayed clear enough to be useful later. This kind of precision required not just knowledge of wine, but deep understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. And let's talk about the entertainment. Roman dinner parties didn't just serve food. They served experiences that were designed to overwhelm the senses and lower psychological defenses. Professional musicians didn't just play background melodies, they performed complex musical narratives that guided the emotional journey of the evening. Dancers didn't just provide visual pleasure, they told stories through movement that reinforced whatever message the host wanted to communicate. Even the food was strategic. Exotic delicacies weren't just about showing wealth. They were conversation starters that got guests talking about far-off places and distant peoples. A dish of peacock prepared with Indian spices naturally led to discussions about trade routes and political situations in the eastern provinces. Oysters imported from Britain prompted conversations about the conquest of the northern territories and the resources available there. The Romans understood something that modern intelligence agencies are still trying to master. The best way to extract information isn't through intimidation or torture. It's through creating environments so pleasurable that people want to share everything they know. They turned espionage into entertainment and made surveillance feel like seduction. But the thermal baths represent perhaps the pinnacle of Roman psychological sophistication. These weren't just places to get clean, they were carefully engineered environments for breaking down social barriers and extracting information. The progression from cold to warm to hot pools wasn't just about physical comfort, it was about gradually stripping away psychological defenses along with clothing. Think about the psychology of nudity in these settings. When everyone is naked, traditional markers of status become less obvious. A senator's toga can't intimidate when it's hanging on a hook 20 feet away. A merchant's expensive jewelry can't establish credibility when it's locked in a changing room. In the baths, people were forced to rely on personality, intelligence, and conversation skills rather than external symbols of power. And the Romans designed every aspect of the bath experience to facilitate this psychological leveling. The architecture created intimate spaces where small groups could have private conversations while still being part of the larger social environment. The temperature progression ensured that everyone went through the same physical experience, creating a sense of shared vulnerability and common ground. The massage oils weren't just luxurious, they were often infused with mild intoxicants that enhanced relaxation and lowered inhibitions. The incense burned in bathhouses contained herbs that were known to promote feelings of trust and openness. Even the lighting was carefully managed to create an atmosphere that felt both private and communal, intimate and grand. What emerges from all this is a picture of Roman nightlife as something far more sophisticated and strategic than simple hedonistic indulgence. Yes, Romans enjoyed pleasure for its own sake, but they also understood that pleasure could be a tool of empire. They created nocturnal environments that were simultaneously genuine entertainment venues and highly effective intelligence-gathering operations. The really brilliant part is that these two functions reinforced each other. The more genuinely pleasurable the experience, the more effective it was at extracting information. The more successful it was at gathering intelligence, the more resources could be invested in making it pleasurable. It was a self-reinforcing cycle that made Roman nightlife both irresistibly attractive and incredibly dangerous for anyone who wasn't paying careful attention. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of Roman night culture. The courtesans. These weren't just prostitutes or entertainers. They were highly educated, politically sophisticated operators who functioned as unofficial diplomats, intelligence agents, and power brokers. The most successful courtesans in Rome wielded influence that rivaled senators and generals precisely because they understood how to navigate the complex world where pleasure and power intersected. A top-tier Roman courtesan wasn't just beautiful. She was multilingual, well-versed in philosophy and politics, skilled in music and poetry, and trained in the subtle arts of psychological manipulation. She could discuss military strategy with a general, debate philosophy with a senator, and extract trade secrets from a merchant, often in the same evening. And she could do all of this while making each man feel like he was the most fascinating person she'd ever met. These women operated in a shadow economy that paralleled the official Roman power structure. They had their own networks, their own intelligence systems, and their own forms of influence that often proved more effective than traditional political channels. A word from the right courtesan could advance or destroy a political career. A recommendation from a respected courtesan could open trade opportunities worth fortunes. And information gathered by courtesans often influenced military and diplomatic decisions at the highest levels of government. The most successful courtesans developed their own codes, their own territories, and their own rules that even emperors respected. They understood that their power came not from beauty alone, but from their ability to create spaces where powerful men could be vulnerable without feeling threatened. A skilled courtesan could make a paranoid emperor feel safe enough to share his fears, or convince a corrupt governor that she was the only person who truly understood his genius. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. These women often came from nothing. Many started as slaves, others as daughters of tradesmen or farmers. Yet through mastering the arts of Roman nightlife, they could achieve levels of influence and wealth that were impossible through any other path. They proved that in the Roman night, intelligence and skill could triumph over birth and status in ways that daylight Rome would never allow. The economic impact of this nocturnal world was staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that nighttime activities generated nearly 30% of Rome's urban economy. Wine imports alone employed thousands of people, from the vineyard workers in Gaul to the amphora makers in Spain, to the ship captains who transported liquid gold across the Mediterranean. The bathhouses required armies of slaves to maintain their complex heating systems, armies of craftsmen to create their elaborate mosaics, and armies of attendants to serve their demanding clientele. But the real money flowed through what Romans called nocturnal commerce, the buying and selling of everything from information to influence to access. A single piece of intelligence about grain shipments could be worth thousands of denarii to the right merchant. An introduction to the right senator could be worth a fortune to an ambitious provincial. And an invitation to the right dinner party could literally change the course of someone's life. The Romans created elaborate systems for managing these transactions. There were brokers who specialized in political introductions, agents who dealt exclusively in military intelligence, and facilitators who could arrange meetings between people who officially weren't supposed to know each other existed. The night economy had its own currency, its own credit systems, and its own enforcement mechanisms that operated completely outside the official Roman legal framework. And the scale of these operations was breathtaking. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows wine shops that could store over 50,000 gallons of wine, bathhouses that could accommodate 3,000 bathers simultaneously, and dining facilities that could host banquets for hundreds of guests. These weren't small neighborhood establishments. They were industrial-scale pleasure operations that required massive investments and generated enormous profits. The logistics alone were mind-boggling. Consider what it took to supply a single major Roman dinner party. Exotic ingredients had to be transported from across the empire. Spices from India, oysters from Britain, garum from Spain, honey from Greece. Musicians and entertainers had to be recruited from the finest schools and temples. Servants had to be trained in elaborate protocols that governed everything from the timing of course presentations to the proper way to dilute wine for different types of guests. But the Romans didn't just throw money at these events. They engineered them with scientific precision. They understood that the human brain responds differently to stimuli depending on the time of night, the amount of alcohol consumed, and the social dynamics of the group. They knew that certain combinations of food, wine, and entertainment could produce predictable psychological states in their guests. and they used this knowledge to create experiences that were simultaneously irresistibly pleasurable and strategically valuable. The thermal baths represent perhaps the ultimate expression of this Roman genius for combining pleasure with purpose. These massive complexes weren't just bathing facilities. They were like small cities dedicated to the pursuit of physical and social transformation. The baths of Caracalla could hold 1,600 bathers at once, but they also included libraries, art galleries, gardens, shops, restaurants, and exercise facilities. You could literally spend days there without ever leaving. But the real innovation was in the social architecture. The Romans designed these spaces to facilitate exactly the kind of chance encounters and gradual relationship building that made their intelligence gathering so effective. The progression from exercise yard to cold pool to warm room to hot room to massage area created natural opportunities for conversations to develop and deepen. By the time two strangers had completed the full circuit together, they had shared an intimate physical experience that created bonds of trust and familiarity. And the Romans were masters at populating these spaces with the right mix of people. Bathhouse managers kept detailed records of their clientele, tracking not just who came when, but who they talked to, what they discussed, and what information changed hands. The best managers could orchestrate seemingly casual encounters between people who needed to meet, while making sure that potentially dangerous combinations never ended up in the same space at the same time. The wine trade reveals another layer of Roman sophistication. This wasn't just about importing and selling fermented grape juice. It was about creating liquid experiences that could transport people to different psychological and emotional states. Roman wine merchants were part chemist, part psychologist, and part artist. They understood that different wines produce different effects, and they could blend and modify their products to achieve specific results. Some wines were designed to promote relaxation and openness, perfect for dinner parties where hosts wanted guests to share information freely. Others were formulated to enhance alertness and memory, ideal for business meetings where complex deals needed to be negotiated and remembered accurately. Still others were created to inspire passion and abandon, essential for the kind of intimate encounters that sealed alliances and created lasting bonds between political allies. The Romans even developed wines that changed their effects over the course of an evening. A skilled host could serve wines that started mild and became progressively more potent, ensuring that guests remained articulate and engaging during the important early conversations, but became more pliable and suggestible as the night progressed. Or they could reverse the process, starting with wines that loosened tongues and lowered defenses, then switching to varieties that sharpened focus and enhanced memory just when the most important business was being conducted. The entertainment industry that grew up around Roman nightlife was equally sophisticated. Professional entertainers didn't just perform. They were trained observers who could read the mood of a room and adjust their performances to achieve specific psychological effects. Musicians could use rhythm and melody to heighten excitement during political discussions or calm tensions when negotiations became heated. Dancers could tell stories through movement that reinforced whatever messages hosts wanted to communicate to their guests. Even the poets and storytellers who performed at Roman dinner parties were skilled psychological operators. They knew how to use narrative and metaphor to plant ideas in listeners' minds, how to frame complex political situations in terms that made certain conclusions seem inevitable, and how to make their audiences feel cleverer and more sophisticated for understanding subtle references and hidden meanings. The really brilliant part was how all these elements worked together to create experiences that felt spontaneous and natural while being carefully orchestrated down to the smallest detail. Guests at the best Roman dinner parties came away feeling like they had participated in magical evenings where everything flowed perfectly, where the conversation was brilliant, where the wine was exceptional, and where they had made important new connections purely by chance. They rarely realized that every aspect of their experience had been planned and managed by teams of professionals who understood exactly how to create the illusion of spontaneity while achieving very specific strategic objectives. The Romans had turned social engineering into high art, and they practiced it every night across their vast empire. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Roman nightlife was how it created a parallel universe where different rules applied, different hierarchies emerged, and different possibilities existed. During the day, Roman society was rigidly stratified. Everyone knew their place, everyone understood the rules, and stepping outside established boundaries was dangerous and usually futile. But when darkness fell, those boundaries became permeable. Slaves could gamble with senators if they had money and luck. Foreign merchants could dine with patrician families if they had interesting goods or useful information. Talented entertainers could join philosophical discussions with the empire's greatest minds if they had something valuable to contribute. This wasn't chaos. It was controlled flexibility. The Romans understood that their rigid daytime hierarchy was essential for maintaining order across their vast empire, but they also recognized that complete rigidity would eventually break under its own weight. The nighttime world provided a safety valve that allowed talented and ambitious people to find alternative paths to advancement, while giving the established elite access to fresh ideas and new sources of wealth and power. The result was a society that was simultaneously more stable and more dynamic than it appeared from the outside. Potential revolutionaries could be co-opted through nocturnal advancement opportunities. Useful foreigners could be gradually integrated into Roman power structures through carefully managed dinner party relationships. And emerging threats could be identified and neutralized through the intelligence networks that operated in wine shops and bathhouses across the empire. This is why Roman nightlife wasn't just entertainment. It was statecraft of the highest order, and understanding how it worked gives us insight not just into ancient history, but into the eternal relationship between pleasure and power, between social control and individual freedom, between the public face of civilization and the private realities that actually determine how societies function. The wine shops of Rome after dark weren't just places to drink. They were theaters of human transformation where ordinary citizens shed their daytime personas like discarded togas. Step into the Capona of Marcus Lucianus near the Circus Maximus around the 3rd hour of night, and you'd witness something that would fundamentally challenge everything you thought you knew about Roman society. The air thick with smoke from oil lamps and the sweet scent of mulled wine. Conversations flowing in at least 6 different languages, and deals being struck that would reshape trade routes from Britannia to Babylon. But here's what would really shock you. The complete inversion of everything that defined Roman social order during daylight hours. That elderly man in the corner hunched over a cup of Falernian wine and speaking in hushed tones to a woman young enough to be his granddaughter? He's Senator Gaius Flavius, and she's Livia, a freedwoman who controls more shipping contracts than most patrician families see in a lifetime. During the day, they couldn't be seen together without causing a scandal that would destroy his political career. But here in the wine-soaked shadows of nocturnal Rome, they're negotiating a grain deal that will feed half the city and make them both incredibly wealthy. The Romans had a genius for creating spaces where impossible things became possible. And their wine culture was the perfect vehicle for this transformation. But we're not talking about casual drinking here. Roman wine consumption was a precisely calibrated art form that made modern sommelier culture look like amateur hour. Consider the complexity of a single evening's wine service at an upscale Roman gathering. The night would begin with mulsum, honey wine mixed with spices that warmed the throat and loosened the tongue just enough to get conversations flowing. But the honey wasn't just sweetener. It was a mild euphoric that enhanced sociability while keeping minds sharp for the important early discussions. As the evening progressed, hosts would switch to conditum paradoxum, a wine aged with pepper, bay leaves, and saffron that cost more per amphora than most Romans earned in a year. This wasn't just about luxury, it was about creating a shared experience of exotic sensations that bonded guests together and made them feel like participants in something truly special. But here's where Roman wine mastery really showed itself. The dilution ratios. A skilled host could control the exact level of intoxication in their guests by adjusting how much water they mixed with the wine throughout the evening. Too much water early on and guests remained guarded and formal. Too little and they became incoherent before the important business could be conducted. The perfect Roman host maintained their guests in that sweet spot of relaxed alertness where inhibitions were lowered but intelligence remained intact, where secrets flowed freely but memories stayed clear enough to honor agreements made in wine-induced camaraderie. This required not just knowledge of wine, but deep understanding of human psychology and the precise timing of social dynamics. And the Romans took this so seriously that they developed an entire professional class dedicated to wine service. The Magister Bibendi wasn't just a servant who poured drinks. He was a master of ceremonies who orchestrated the psychological journey of the evening through careful wine selection and mixing. The best magistri Bibendi were worth their weight in gold because they could make or break political alliances with their mixing bowls. But the real genius was in the variety. Roman wine merchants didn't just import different vintages, they created entirely different categories of experience. Vinum dulce for romantic encounters that needed to progress slowly and sensually. Vinum Acre for business meetings where sharp thinking was essential. Vinum Veteranum for political discussions where gravitas and wisdom needed to be projected. They even had wines designed for specific types of negotiations. Cucuban wine from the marshes of Latium was known to make men more generous with their offers. Chian wine from the Greek islands enhanced memory and made complex agreements easier to remember. And the legendary Opimian vintage, wine from grapes grown during the consulship of Opimius, was reserved for the most important occasions because it was believed to grant divine favor to any agreement sealed while drinking it. The archaeological evidence for this sophistication is staggering. Wine shops in Pompeii had storage systems that could maintain dozens of different wines at specific temperatures and humidity levels. They had mixing equipment that allowed for precise dilution ratios. And they had record-keeping systems that tracked not just inventory, but customer preferences, seasonal variations, and even the psychological effects of different blends on different types of personalities. But wine was just the opening act. The real transformation happened in the thermal baths, where the Romans perfected the art of strategic nudity. And yes, you read that correctly. The Romans understood something that modern intelligence agencies are still trying to master. There's no more effective way to break down psychological barriers than to literally strip away the external symbols of power and status. Picture yourself entering the baths of Agrippa on a typical evening. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the sound. Conversations echoing off marble walls, the splash of water, the rhythmic pounding of masseurs working on their clients. But listen more carefully and you start to pick out fragments of discussions that would reshape the ancient world. In the caldarium, the hot room where temperatures reached levels that would make a modern sauna seem cool, senators and merchants negotiated trade agreements while sweat poured down their faces. The extreme heat served multiple purposes. It was impossible to hide weapons or recording devices. The physical discomfort created a sense of shared vulnerability, and the need to focus on breathing and temperature regulation made it harder to maintain careful lies or elaborate deceptions. The Romans discovered that people in extreme physical states became more honest, more direct, and more willing to make quick decisions. A deal that might take weeks to negotiate in the formal setting of a basilica could be settled in minutes when both parties were sitting naked in a 120-degree heat, focused more on survival than on elaborate negotiating strategies. But the genius was in the progression. Baths weren't just single rooms, they were carefully designed journeys that gradually broke down resistance and built trust. You started in the apoditerium, the changing room, where the simple act of removing clothes began the process of psychological transformation. Then the frigidarium, the cold room, where the shock of cold water created an immediate bond between everyone experiencing it together. Next came the tepidarium, the warm room, where temperatures were comfortable enough for extended conversation but warm enough to promote relaxation and openness. This was where most of the serious talking happened, where relationships were built and preliminary agreements were reached. The caldarium was for sealing deals, and the final cold plunge was for celebrating new partnerships with a shared shock that would be remembered for years. The massage rooms were perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated spaces in the entire complex. Here, professional masseurs who were trained not just in physical therapy but in conversation and observation worked on clients while extracting information that would be passed along to whoever was paying for intelligence. A skilled masseur could learn more about a client's financial situation, political loyalties, and personal vulnerabilities in an hour of apparently therapeutic manipulation than a spy could discover in weeks of conventional surveillance. And the oils used in these massages weren't just lubricants. They were carefully formulated compounds that enhanced specific psychological states. Some contained mild intoxicants that promoted feelings of trust and openness. Others included stimulants that enhanced memory and made complex information easier to retain. Still others were designed to create feelings of euphoria and well-being that made clients associate positive emotions with whoever had provided the experience. The Romans even developed specialized massage techniques that could induce specific psychological responses. Deep pressure on certain points could promote feelings of submission and compliance. Light, rhythmic touches could enhance creativity and make clients more receptive to new ideas. And skilled masseurs could read their clients' responses and adjust their techniques throughout the session to achieve whatever psychological state their employers desired. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Roman bath culture was how it democratized access to power in ways that would be impossible in any other setting. In the baths, a clever freedman with valuable information could find himself in conversation with a consul. A foreign merchant with exotic goods could catch the attention of a senator's wife, and talented courtesans could gain access to circles of power that would be completely closed to them in daylight Rome. This wasn't accidental. Roman bathhouses were designed to create exactly these kinds of unlikely encounters. The architecture forced people from different social classes to share the same spaces and experiences. The nudity eliminated visual markers of status and wealth, and the shared vulnerability of the bathing experience created bonds that transcended normal social boundaries. The result was a parallel power structure that operated alongside but separate from official Roman politics. Decisions made in bathhouses often proved more important than laws passed in the Senate. Alliances forged in steamy caldaria lasted longer than treaties signed in marble basilicas. And information gathered by bathhouse attendants often influenced military campaigns and diplomatic negotiations at the highest levels of government. The economic impact of this system was enormous. Bathhouses employed thousands of people, from the slaves who maintained the complex heating systems to the skilled craftsmen who created elaborate mosaics to the professional attendants who served demanding clientele. But the real money flowed through what the Romans called balneary commerce, the buying and selling of access, information, and influence that happened in these steamy halls of power. Conservative estimates suggest that bathhouse activities generated nearly 20% of Rome's urban economy. A single piece of intelligence overheard in a caldarium could be worth thousands of denarii to the right merchant. An introduction made in a tepidarium could launch a political career worth millions. And an alliance forged in a massage room could reshape trade relationships across the entire Mediterranean world. The Romans created elaborate systems for managing these transactions. There were brokers who specialized in bathhouse introductions, agents who dealt exclusively in intelligence gathered during massage sessions, and facilitators who could arrange private meetings in the most exclusive thermal complexes. The bathhouse economy had its own currency, its own credit systems, and its own enforcement mechanisms that operated completely outside the official Roman legal framework, and the scale was breathtaking. The baths of Caracalla could accommodate 1,600 bathers simultaneously, but they also included libraries, art galleries, shops, restaurants, and exercise facilities. You could literally live there for weeks without ever leaving, and many wealthy Romans essentially did, maintaining permanent suites in the complex and conducting all their business from the steamy halls of aquatic power. But the baths were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The dinner parties of wealthy Romans represented perhaps the ultimate fusion of pleasure and politics, where every course was choreographed, every conversation was calculated, and every guest was carefully selected to advance specific strategic objectives. Roman dinner parties weren't casual gatherings, they were theatrical productions that rivaled anything staged in the Colosseum for sheer spectacle and strategic importance. A single invitation to the right dinner party could launch a career, forge an alliance, or destroy an enemy. And the hosts who mastered this art wielded influence that often exceeded that of elected officials. Consider what it took to orchestrate a major Roman dinner party. Guest lists weren't just about who you liked or who was available. They were about creating exactly the right mix of personalities, interests, and agendas to achieve specific outcomes. Seating arrangements weren't based on social rank alone. They were designed to facilitate particular conversations and prevent others. Even the timing of when different guests arrived was carefully managed to control the flow of information and influence throughout the evening. The food wasn't just nourishment, it was communication. Exotic delicacies from distant provinces sent messages about wealth and connections. Rare wines demonstrated access to exclusive networks. And the presentation of each course was timed to coincide with specific phases of conversation and negotiation. But the real art was in the entertainment. Professional musicians, dancers, poets, and storytellers weren't just providing background ambiance. They were skilled psychological operators who could read the mood of a room and adjust their performances to achieve specific effects. A skilled musician could use rhythm and melody to heighten excitement during political discussions or calm tensions when negotiations became heated. Dancers could tell stories through movement that reinforced whatever messages hosts wanted to communicate. Poets could plant ideas in listeners' minds through carefully crafted verses that seemed purely aesthetic, but contained subtle political or commercial messages. And storytellers could frame complex situations in narrative terms that made certain conclusions seem inevitable. The entertainment was also used to provide cover for private conversations. During an elaborate musical performance, two guests could conduct sensitive negotiations knowing that their words would be masked by the music and their attention seemingly focused on the entertainment. Dramatic recitations provided opportunities for hosts to signal approval or disapproval of particular ideas through their reactions to seemingly unrelated poetic themes. Even the servants were part of the intelligence operation. Wine bearers were trained to remember conversations and report back to their masters. Food servers could position themselves to overhear discussions while appearing to focus on their duties. And massage specialists who worked on guests between courses could extract information through seemingly casual conversation while their clients were in relaxed, vulnerable states. The Romans perfected the art of making espionage feel like hospitality, surveillance seem like service, and intelligence gathering appear to be simple entertainment. They created environments so seductive and pleasurable that guests wanted to share their secrets, so luxurious and exclusive that people competed for the privilege of being manipulated. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Roman dinner party culture was how it created lasting psychological bonds between participants. Sharing exotic foods, experiencing elaborate entertainment, and participating in elevated conversations created memories that participants treasured for years. These positive associations made people more likely to honor agreements reached during dinner parties, more willing to provide future favors to their hosts, and more resistant to offers from competing interests. The Romans understood that the most effective form of control isn't force. It's creating situations where people want to be controlled, where submission feels like privilege and manipulation feels like friendship. Their dinner parties weren't just social events, they were sophisticated psychological operations that turned pleasure into power and hospitality into influence. And the scale of these operations was staggering. Wealthy Romans routinely hosted dinners for hundreds of guests, with multiple courses served simultaneously in different rooms to accommodate different types of conversations and negotiations. The logistics alone required teams of professional planners, vast networks of suppliers, and coordination systems that rivaled military campaigns in their complexity and precision. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii and Herculaneum shows dining rooms that could be reconfigured for different types of gatherings, with movable walls, adjustable lighting systems, and even mechanical devices that could alter the acoustic properties of rooms to enhance or muffle conversations as needed. These weren't just homes, they were entertainment complexes designed for psychological warfare disguised as hospitality. The economic impact was enormous. The dinner party industry employed thousands of people, from the farmers who grew exotic ingredients to the artists who created elaborate serving vessels, to the professional entertainers who performed at these gatherings. But the real value flowed through the decisions made and agreements reached during these carefully orchestrated social encounters. Military campaigns were planned over elaborate feasts. Trade routes were established during wine-soaked negotiations. Political alliances were forged between courses of peacock and dormice, and the future of the empire was often decided not in the marble halls of official government, but in the perfumed dining rooms of wealthy citizens who understood that power flowed through pleasure as much as through force. The courtesans who operated in this world represented perhaps the pinnacle of Roman sophistication in combining personal appeal with political influence. These weren't just beautiful women selling physical pleasure, they were highly educated, politically astute operators who functioned as unofficial diplomats, intelligence agents, and power brokers. The most successful courtesans in Rome could speak multiple languages, discuss philosophy and literature, debate political strategy, and extract valuable information while making their targets feel like the most fascinating people they'd ever met. They operated in a shadow economy that paralleled the official Roman power structure, with their own networks, their own intelligence systems, and their own forms of influence that often proved more effective than traditional political channels. These women didn't just stumble into positions of influence through luck or beauty alone. They were products of a sophisticated training system that produced some of the most psychologically adept individuals in the ancient world. Young girls selected for courtesan training underwent years of education that would rival what was available to senators' sons. They learned rhetoric from Greek philosophers, studied poetry with master scribes, and practiced the subtle arts of reading facial expressions, vocal tones, and body language until they could detect lies and hidden motivations with uncanny accuracy. But their real education happened in the field, apprenticed to established courtesans who taught them the unwritten rules of Roman power. They learned which senators could be flattered into revealing military secrets, which merchants would trade information for the promise of future intimacy, and which foreign dignitaries could be turned into assets through carefully managed emotional manipulation. The most talented courtesans developed specialties that made them invaluable to specific types of clients. Some became experts in military intelligence, cultivating relationships with generals and centurions who shared strategic information during moments of vulnerability. Others focused on commercial espionage, extracting trade secrets from merchants who thought they were impressing sophisticated women with their business acumen. Still others specialized in political intelligence, becoming confidants to senators' wives who shared gossip about their husbands' activities, or cultivating relationships with ambitious young politicians who revealed their plans and vulnerabilities in exchange for advice and emotional support. The best courtesans could shift between these roles seamlessly, adapting their personas to match whatever their targets needed most. And they operated with a level of protection that would be envied by modern intelligence agents. Attacking or threatening a high-level courtesan wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was politically dangerous. These women had clients who included some of the most powerful men in the empire, and harming someone under their protection could trigger vendettas that destroyed careers and ended lives. The economic power of successful courtesans was staggering. The most elite could command fees that exceeded the annual salaries of provincial governors, but their real wealth came from the information they gathered and the connections they brokered. A single introduction arranged by the right courtesan could be worth hundreds of thousands of denarii. A piece of intelligence about grain shipments or military movements could generate fortunes for the right merchant or general. They invested this wealth strategically, purchasing properties, funding trading ventures, and even bankrolling political campaigns. Some courtesans became shadow financiers who could make or break political careers through their willingness to provide or withhold funding. Others used their wealth to establish their own intelligence networks, employing lesser courtesans, bathhouse attendants, and tavern workers to gather information across the city. The most successful courtesans eventually transcended their origins entirely, becoming respected figures who were consulted on matters of state and invited to participate in decision-making at the highest levels of government. They proved that in nocturnal Rome, intelligence and skill could triumph over birth and status in ways that would be impossible in any other society. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of courtesan culture was how it created alternative pathways for female agency in a society that otherwise offered women very limited opportunities for independence and influence. While respectable Roman women were expected to remain in domestic roles, courtesans could travel freely, conduct business independently, and wield political influence that rivaled male citizens. They established their own codes of conduct, their own systems of mutual protection, and their own methods for training and advancing newcomers. The courtesan community functioned as an alternative power structure that operated parallel to official Roman institutions, providing services and capabilities that the formal government couldn't or wouldn't offer. This shadow world of wine, baths, and whispered conversations wasn't separate from official Roman power. It was integral to how the empire actually functioned. The decisions that shaped the ancient world weren't just made in the Senate or on battlefields. They were forged in the steamy halls of thermal complexes, negotiated over elaborate dinner courses, and sealed in the private chambers of women who understood that information was more valuable than gold. The intelligence gathered in wine shops informed military strategies. The alliances forged in bathhouses determined trade policies. The agreements reached during dinner parties shaped diplomatic relationships with foreign powers. And the networks maintained by courtesans provided early warning systems for political upheavals that could threaten the stability of the entire empire. Roman nightlife wasn't just entertainment. It was a parallel government that operated through pleasure rather than force, through seduction rather than intimidation, and through voluntary participation rather than legal compulsion. It was a system so effective that it helped maintain Roman dominance for centuries, so sophisticated that modern intelligence agencies still study its methods, and so thoroughly integrated into Roman society that the empire literally couldn't function without it. The genius of this system was that it made surveillance feel like luxury, intelligence gathering seem like friendship, and political manipulation appear to be sophisticated entertainment. People competed for the privilege of being spied upon, fought for invitations to gatherings where they would be psychologically dissected, and paid enormous sums for the opportunity to reveal their secrets to trained operators. But the Romans took this even further by creating feedback loops that made the system self-improving. Information gathered during nocturnal activities informed better strategies for future gatherings. Psychological profiles developed through wine-loosened conversations led to more effective manipulation techniques. And the wealth generated through nighttime intelligence operations funded even more elaborate and seductive entertainment venues. The result was a constantly evolving ecosystem of pleasure and power that adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining its core function of extracting valuable information and creating useful relationships. When new threats emerged, the system developed new methods for addressing them. When foreign cultures needed to be understood, specialized operators were trained to penetrate and analyze them. When technological or social changes altered the political landscape, the nocturnal intelligence apparatus adapted its techniques accordingly. This adaptability was crucial because Roman nightlife had to serve multiple masters simultaneously. Military commanders needed intelligence about enemy movements and capabilities. Merchants required information about trade opportunities and commercial threats. Politicians demanded insights into rival factions and potential allies. And the imperial administration needed early warning about rebellions, famines, and other crises that could destabilize the empire. The night economy served all these needs through a distributed network of specialized operators who could gather, analyze, and distribute information more effectively than any centralized bureaucracy. A wine shop owner might specialize in commercial intelligence, reporting on trade discussions overheard during evening drinking sessions. A bathhouse attendant could focus on military information, noting which officers were stressed about upcoming campaigns or confident about recent victories. A dinner party host might concentrate on political intelligence, orchestrating conversations that revealed the true loyalties and ambitions of their guests. And courtesans could serve as integrators, combining information from multiple sources to develop comprehensive assessments of complex situations that required understanding of military, commercial, and political factors simultaneously. The sophistication of this system is evident in how it handled contradictory information and competing interests. Rather than creating a rigid hierarchy that might suppress inconvenient truths, the Roman night economy encouraged multiple perspectives and diverse sources. Information was cross-checked through different channels, validated through independent observations, and tested through carefully designed scenarios that revealed whether initial assessments were accurate. This created a remarkably robust intelligence system that was difficult to deceive or manipulate from the outside. Foreign agents who tried to penetrate Roman networks found themselves dealing not with a single organization they could infiltrate, but with a complex ecosystem of interconnected but independent operators who could verify each other's information and detect inconsistencies that might indicate deception. The economic incentives built into the system ensured that operators had strong motivations to provide accurate information and maintain their reputations for reliability. A wine shop owner who provided false intelligence would quickly lose the trust of valuable clients. A courtesan who proved unreliable would find herself excluded from the networks that generated her wealth and influence, and dinner party hosts who orchestrated unsuccessful negotiations would discover that their invitations were no longer sought after by important guests. But the system also provided rewards for exceptional performance that could transform lives overnight. A bathhouse attendant who uncovered a major conspiracy could find himself elevated to positions of wealth and responsibility. A courtesan who successfully managed a crucial negotiation might be rewarded with properties and investments that set her up for life. And wine shop owners who consistently provided valuable intelligence could gain access to exclusive networks that multiplied their earning potential exponentially. This combination of risks and rewards created a dynamic environment where the most talented and dedicated operators rose to positions of influence, while those who couldn't meet the demands of the system were gradually marginalized. The result was a constantly improving intelligence apparatus that attracted the best minds and most capable individuals from across the empire. The cultural impact of this nocturnal world extended far beyond its immediate intelligence and political functions. Roman nightlife created new forms of art, literature, and philosophy that influenced intellectual development throughout the ancient world. The conversations that took place in wine shops and bathhouses generated ideas that shaped everything from architectural innovations to military tactics to administrative reforms. The entertainment industry that grew up around Roman nightlife pushed artistic boundaries and developed new forms of expression that combined aesthetic beauty with psychological sophistication. Musicians created compositions that could subtly influence listeners' emotional states. Dancers developed performance techniques that communicated complex narratives through movement. And poets crafted verses that operated on multiple levels, entertaining audiences while conveying hidden messages to those who understood the coded references. Even Roman cuisine was transformed by the demands of nocturnal entertainment. Chefs developed dishes that not only pleased the palate but enhanced specific psychological states. Some foods were designed to promote alertness and memory during important negotiations. Others were formulated to encourage relaxation and openness during intelligence-gathering sessions. Still others were created to demonstrate wealth and sophistication while providing conversation topics that could lead discussions in desired directions. The architectural innovations driven by nightlife needs influenced building design throughout the empire. The complex heating systems developed for thermal baths were adapted for residential and commercial buildings. The acoustic engineering that made private conversations possible in crowded entertainment venues was applied to amphitheaters and basilicas. And the lighting techniques that created intimate atmospheres in dinner party settings influenced everything from temple design to military fortifications. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Roman concepts of privacy, intimacy, and personal identity. The nocturnal world created spaces where people could experiment with different aspects of their personalities, explore relationships that would be impossible in daylight society, and develop skills and knowledge that weren't available through official channels. This psychological flexibility may have been one of Rome's greatest strengths, allowing the empire to adapt to changing circumstances and integrate diverse cultures more effectively than more rigid societies. The ability to maintain multiple identities and navigate complex social situations prepared Romans for the challenges of governing a vast multicultural empire where success often depended on understanding and working with very different peoples and customs. The nocturnal economy also provided alternative pathways for social mobility that helped prevent the kind of rigid stratification that could lead to revolutionary upheavals. Talented individuals who might otherwise have become dangerous opponents of the existing order could find opportunities for advancement through the night world that satisfied their ambitions while channeling their abilities in directions that served the empire's interests. This safety valve function was crucial for maintaining political stability in a society with enormous wealth disparities and limited opportunities for legitimate advancement. Rather than creating a permanent underclass of resentful and potentially rebellious citizens, the Roman system provided hope and opportunity for those willing to master the complex skills required to succeed in the nocturnal economy. The international influence of Roman nightlife extended the empire's soft power far beyond its military reach. Foreign dignitaries who experienced Roman entertainment returned to their home countries with new appreciation for Roman sophistication and new desires for Roman goods and services. Merchants who participated in Roman wine culture became advocates for closer commercial relationships, and intellectuals who engaged with Roman philosophers and artists in bathhouse conversations became conduits for Roman ideas and values. This cultural influence often proved more lasting and effective than military conquest. Territories that were never formally incorporated into the Roman Empire nonetheless adopted Roman customs, architectural styles, and social practices that they encountered through nightlife exchanges. The appeal of Roman entertainment culture created voluntary adoption of Roman ways that was more thorough and enduring than forced compliance could ever be. The legacy of Roman nightlife can be seen in virtually every aspect of subsequent Western civilization. Modern diplomatic practices, intelligence-gathering techniques, entertainment industry methods, and even social networking strategies all trace their origins back to innovations developed in the wine shops, bathhouses, and dinner parties of ancient Rome. But understanding this history isn't just about appreciating the past. It's about recognizing patterns that continue to shape how power operates in the modern world. The relationship between pleasure and politics, between entertainment and intelligence, between social interaction and strategic advantage that the Romans perfected continues to influence everything from international diplomacy to corporate strategy to social media manipulation. The Romans proved that the most effective form of power isn't the ability to force compliance, but the capacity to create environments where people want to comply, where giving up secrets feels like sharing confidences, and where being manipulated seems like being entertained. They showed that darkness isn't something to be feared or avoided, but a resource to be mastered and exploited. And as we've seen tonight, when the Romans mastered the darkness, they didn't just create entertainment. They created an empire that lasted for centuries and continues to influence our world today. The wine may have turned to vinegar, the bathhouses may have crumbled to ruins, and the whispered conversations may have faded to silence. But the lessons of Roman nightlife echo through history, reminding us that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the blazing light of day, but in the shadowy spaces where wine flows, steam rises, and secrets are traded like currency in the eternal dance between pleasure and power. So what does all this mean for you sitting here in the 21st century, probably drinking coffee instead of mulled wine and scrolling through social media instead of whispering secrets in steamy bathhouses? The uncomfortable truth is that the Romans didn't just invent nightlife as we know it. They perfected something we're still trying to understand: the art of turning pleasure into power. Every modern intelligence agency studies Roman techniques. Every successful politician learns from Roman social strategies, and every entertainment industry executive tries to recreate the psychological sophistication that made Roman gatherings irresistible. But here's what the Romans understood that we're only beginning to grasp. Real influence doesn't come from force or authority. It comes from creating environments where people want to give you what you need, where sharing secrets feels like intimacy, where being manipulated feels like being valued, and where surrendering control seems like gaining access to something exclusive and desirable. The next time you're at a networking event, a business dinner, or even just a party, look around and ask yourself, who's really in control here? Who's gathering information while appearing to just make conversation? Who's building alliances while seeming to simply enjoy themselves? And who's creating the kind of memorable experiences that turn casual encounters into lasting relationships? The Romans proved that darkness isn't something to fear. It's something to master. They showed us that the most important conversations happen not in boardrooms or official meetings, but in the informal spaces where guard are down and truths slip out. They demonstrated that entertainment isn't separate from politics. It's one of the most effective forms of politics ever invented. And perhaps most importantly, they revealed that understanding human psychology isn't just an academic exercise, it's the key to everything. Whether you're trying to build an empire, close a business deal, or simply navigate the complex social world we all live in, the lessons learned in Roman wine shops and bathhouses remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. The wine may be different, the baths may be private, and the whispers may happen over encrypted messages, but the fundamental dynamics remain the same. Power still flows through pleasure, influence still operates through intimacy, and the real decisions that shape our world are still made in the shadows, by people who understand that sometimes the most effective way to conquer someone is to make them enjoy the experience. So the next time darkness falls, remember the Romans. Remember that they turned night into their greatest weapon, pleasure into their most effective tool, and entertainment into the foundation of an empire that lasted 1,000 years. Because in the end, they didn't just master the art of conquest, they mastered the art of seduction. And in a world where attention is the ultimate currency and influence is the ultimate prize, that might be the most valuable lesson of all. The eternal city may have fallen, but the eternal night lives on. And somewhere in the shadows, in wine bars and hotel lounges, in private clubs and exclusive gatherings, the descendants of Roman courtesans and bathhouse operators continue their ancient work, proving that when it comes to power and pleasure, some things never really change. Sleep well tonight, knowing that you've glimpsed behind the marble facade of history to see how empires really work. And remember, in ancient Rome, the night belonged to those bold enough to claim it. The question is, what will you do with your darkness?